Hello and welcome to this free tutorial. To help me, I'm going to be using this set of notes, which you can download freely from flippinghistory.net. Joseph Vissarionovich Djugashvili was born in Georgia, the son of an alcoholic cobbler. Yet by about 1928 to 1929, he had become the most powerful man in the largest country on earth. So in this tutorial, we will explore how this came to be. And we'll start off by looking at the background in Russia before he came to power. Now, if we go back to 1903, there was a party called the Socialist Revolutionary Party, or the SRs, and they broke into two. On the one hand, you had the Bolsheviks, which means majority, although in actual fact, that was Lenin, the leader, being a bit clever because they were really the minority. And on the other hand, you had another group called the Mensheviks, which means minority. They were a party arguing about how to change government in Russia, and they wanted to do away with the Tsar, who was a bit like the king, and with a system of autocracy where one person has all the power. And so in October 1917, the Bolshevik Party, headed by Lenin, seized power by storming the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg. The relatively small Bolshevik Party was helped in its successful overthrow by a range of factors. Lenin and the Bolsheviks believed in Marxism, a set of ideas created by a German philosopher, Karl Marx, which promoted the inevitability of a government which would rule along the lines of each according to his needs. For Lenin, the man who led the revolution, however, it was necessary for a party to govern for the people, by which he meant the proletariat or the working classes. All land, factories and businesses, the so-called means of production, had to be seized by the state and redistributed according to need. This is a very noble concept, but in reality, the Russian communists were faced with a number of problems which resulted in a bitter civil war and lots of economic disarray. The scale of opposition they faced led to them using widespread terror and short-term economic compromises. Indeed, some private enterprise was allowed under the new economic policy, and this was to prevent the nation starving to death because many farmers were simply choosing to destroy their grain and their cattle rather than give it away to the government for it to be requisitioned. So, the first point we'll look at now, we've got some context, is the young Stalin's background. Stalin's real name, as we know, was Joseph Djugashvili, and his background provides some clues as to the reasons behind his later success. He was of peasant stock and the son of a Georgian cobbler. His father ruled the family with violence, and the young Stalin went to a church school and later a theological seminary in the hope of becoming a priest. Instead, however, he became gradually influenced by the ideas of socialism. He took on the name of Koba, a Robin Hood-style Georgian figure, and then later Stalin, which means man of steel. As a young communist, he led daring bank robberies to fund the party and often escaped the Okhrana, the Tsarist secret police. He was, however, arrested 6 times between 1902 to 1913 for revolutionary activity and was exiled twice to Siberia, where the harsh and freezing conditions taught him the importance of being self-reliant. And if you can survive Siberia, you can pretty much survive anything. Stalin's organizational skills and ruthlessness brought him to the attention of Lenin, and as early as 1912, Stalin had become one of the 6 members of the Central Committee of the Bolshevik Party. He also helped to set up the party's newspaper, Pravda, which means truth, Stalin took on the role of defending Tsaritsyn, which later became known as Stalingrad, during the Civil War, and he was rewarded for his hard work with the post of Commissar for Nationalities after the October Revolution itself. So, spend a few minutes breaking that down. What is there in Stalin's background that suggests he might be a future leader? Is he resilient during his time in Siberia? Is he persecuted by the Tsarist government and looking for a chance to change? Has he learned that violence is important through the violence and force used by his father? And how too might the role of a priest, go to a seminary, influence his speech and his speech-making abilities? Okay, we'll now move on to the second section, which deals with Trotsky, who was the heir apparent to Lenin in many respects. Now, Lenin had suffered a series of strokes, and after his third, lost the power of speech. He could only say monosyllabic words such as vot vot, which means here, here. It was clear a new leader was needed. And despite all of the strengths above, Stalin had some apparent major weaknesses to many, and when Lenin died in 1924, it was Trotsky, whose real name is Lev Bronstein, who was regarded as this heir apparent. After all, he'd been the leader of the Red Army in the Civil War with his famous armoured train. And Stalin, despite all his organisational skill, had a limited grasp of Marxist ideas or ideology, and he believed that Russia should stabilise itself before worrying about revolution taking place in other countries. This policy of Stalin's was known as socialism in one country. Trotsky, on the other hand, was an expert and spoke of permanent revolution, which was the idea that the whole world would inevitably light up in one big communist fire. Moreover, Trotsky had a formidable intellect. He had excelled in maths in Odessa at university, and he was a superb speaker who would captivate crowds with his oratory. Stalin, on the other hand, spoke with a thick Georgian accent and, with his short stature, pockmarked face, and withered hand and webbed feet, didn't make such a dazzling speaker. Trotsky famously showed how much he underestimated Stalin when he described him as a colourless blur. Trotsky had been from a wealthy Jewish background and could be a bit aloof and a bit aristocratic in his behaviour, which annoyed the anti-Semitic Stalin. By his own words, Trotsky was unsociable, individual and aristocratic. And historian Isaac Deutscher states, it seemed to Trotsky almost a joke that Stalin should be his rival. Moreover, Trotsky had previously been a Menshevik before they split, before the revolution, which annoyed Stalin further, and some wondered if he really believed in party ideology or if he was just working to quench his own power thirst. So there was much uncertainty after Lenin's death, and even before this event, Stalin began to lay the foundations for power. He had become General Secretary in 1922, and this was seen as a bit of a paperwork job, which was not fashionable and which many people, certainly Trotsky, saw as beneath them. But Stalin knew he had the perfect organisational skills for the role, and he immediately went about using the position to gain influence and gather information. So in the role of General Secretary, he tapped phones. He had access to 26,000 personal files of party members, and he even bugged Lenin's home. Moreover, he ensured Felix Dzerzhinsky, the head of the secret police, report to him personally. And so Stalin was able to use this position to promote cronies or friends or henchmen to positions of power within the Politburo, and so quietly build up a support base. These people included names such as Molotov, Kalinin and Voroshilov. Saw as beneath them. But Stalin knew he had the perfect organisational skills for the role, and he immediately went about using the position to gain influence and gather information. So in the role of General Secretary, he tapped phones. He had access to 26,000 personal files of party members, and he even bugged Lenin's home. Moreover, he ensured Felix Dzerzhinsky, the head of the secret police, report to him personally. And so Stalin was able to use this position to promote cronies or friends or henchmen to positions of power within the Politburo, and so quietly build up a support base. These people included names such as Molotov, Kalinin and Voroshilov. And also Sergei Kirov was made head of the party in Leningrad. And so, when it came to crucial votes in the party, Stalin could defeat opponents and he had the support of people around him, and it's a key reason in his rise to power. Trotsky, on the other hand, was unlucky and contracted malaria, which slowed him down at a time when he should have been working his hardest. Moreover, though, Stalin was helped through the launching of the Lenin enrollment between 1923 to 25. The aim of this membership drive was to increase the number of industrial workers in the party, and over 500,000 were recruited. The new members were poorly educated and politically naive, and they were more likely to feel an allegiance to the peasant Stalin than the middle-class Trotsky. On Lenin's death, Stalin, the failed priest, remember, quickly moved to make himself appear as Lenin's natural successor. He spoke at the funeral in religious-sounding language, thus beginning the cult of personality with phrases like, "We swear to thee, Comrade Lenin." Trotsky, on the other hand, as we know, missed the funeral and later gave the excuse, allegedly, that Stalin had not given him the right date. Trotsky also made another mistake in refusing to publish Lenin's last written work, known as Testament, in which he had described Stalin as grubost, or rude. This was because Lenin had also criticised other members of the Politburo, and Trotsky didn't want to release this information. Despite the objections of his wife, Krupskaya, Lenin was embalmed and entombed in a mausoleum in Red Square. His pickled brain was taken away for special examination and deemed to be bigger than a normal brain. Thus began the cult of personality, of which more in a future lesson. But again, if we pause and just take a moment to reflect, we've talked about Stalin's background being important, but there's also a lot of evidence there that Trotsky made mistakes. He didn't release Testament. He saw himself as a bit arrogant and the natural successor, and also he missed Lenin's funeral. So, the defeat of the left. Stalin decided to take sides with two leading left-wing party members, Zinoviev and Kamenev, in order to isolate Trotsky, accusing him of factionalism. This group of three was known as the Triumvirate, and it prevented Trotsky forming a larger support base. Trotsky then joined forces with Zinoviev and Kamenev later, arguing against a new economic policy and in favour of permanent revolution. And Stalin, as we know, opposed this policy. And with the support he had built up in the Politburo through his work as Gensec, or General Secretary, he managed to defeat them in the 15th Party Congress. Trotsky, sticking to his principles, was exiled to Alma-Ata in Kazakhstan in Central Asia. He later moved to Mexico, where he was killed by an assassin who put an ice pick through his head, many believe at Stalin's request. So now that Stalin had defeated the left, he then turned on the right. So now that the left, Trotsky, Kamenev, and Zinoviev had been effectively sidelined, he focused on the right of the party, namely Tomsky, Rykov and Bukharin. The left had seen violence and force as the only way to force the peasants to grow more food. The right preferred a policy of persuasion. All were removed from their posts except Rykov, who remained until 1930. Tomsky committed suicide in 1936. So, from very humble beginnings, Stalin had become the most powerful man in an empire spanning 1/3 of the world's land surface by about 1928 to 29. The main factors leading to the rise of Stalin then include differences in personality, Lenin's death in 1924 and his funeral, Stalin's crucial positions within the party, not least the role of General Secretary, structural changes in the party with the Lenin enrollment, and of course Trotsky's errors. Right, thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you'd like to learn more about this topic, visit my website at www.flippinghistory.net and you'll find a fully resourced free set of lesson materials to answer the question.